So really personal excellence is concerned with the problem of kind of the intimate issue of navigating what it means to be a human being in a human skin, and actually achieving from one's life what one wishes to achieve from one's life. And we have it's a kind of question that we often ask people. We say, what do you want from life? What is your intent? And there's a number of questions that you can ask that address that issue. Like, what concerns you? What do you aspire to? Why do you work? And they're all sort of questions that are aiming at the same content. And the content is, what is important to you? What is your intent? And what you have here is a reasonably typical list. In fact, I got this off a group of people that I trained some time ago as an answer to that question, what's important to you? And so, I mean, you could see from this list, this is kind of, it's a bit of a bag, but it's, in this bag, there's, first of all, the things that you would probably recognize for yourself, like it is important probably to earn a living, or to have fun, or to have a sense of challenge in your life, to build your career, or have a sense of making a contribution. And if you look at the content, the first thing that is apparent is that there's definitely themes in the content. And I think there are 4 themes in the content. First of all, there's a theme that's concerned with the issue of security. Keeping a roof over my head. I mean, getting paid. It's kind of like, I suppose, the basics. Second to that, there'll be issues relating to fulfillment, like having a sense of challenge in my job, developing or growing as a person. Thirdly, there's a theme which is concerned with power, and why it's concerned with power is that it's got a definite competitive sting in the tail of this thing. I mean, building my career, achieving something in my life. I mean, what you're really saying when those things are important to you is that I don't want to die a nobody. And I think that's pretty much true for all people. Everybody wants to die a somebody. So all of us have within us this desire to kind of go up in life, to become more significant over time. And because this issue is, in a sense, competitive in character, it is about power. It is about rising up in the social hierarchy. Then this last theme is, in a sense, the opposite, making a contribution, having great colleagues, making the world a better place. The feel about that is more collaborative rather than competitive. And that's why you can designate that theme as harmony. So what I'm trying to suggest here is that it doesn't matter who you ask this question of. You can always reduce what people say to these 4 categories. You don't need a 5th basket for the content. You can fit whatever people say to the question, what's important to you, to one of these 4. And I wouldn't even go as far as to say that there's a hierarchy to these things, because I don't think that's necessarily true, because you could have one person having elements in all 4 of these baskets. What isn't apparent to people, though, is that they don't work in the right place in order to achieve these things, because if you ask people, where do you commit most of the effort that you do that will deliver these 4 things to you, they would say, well, generally, I commit it at work. And actually, these 4 things aren't things that you get at work. I mean, these things are actually things that you produce in your own skin. And the reason for that these things are each one of these 4 elements are the product of how your intent operates. In other words, you don't get it at work, you take it to work, because you manufacture it inside yourself. If you have a look at the issue of intent, what becomes apparent is that in any situation, I mean, in the first instance, your intent is really concerned with how you engage your world. So there's this very nice portrait of me, as you can see there. And, I'm confronted by a world. And I can construct my intent in any given situation on either what I'm getting or what I'm giving. And these 2 things work differently, because if I get something, the thing that I'm getting moves from other to self. And when I give something, the thing that I'm giving moves from self to other. Now, there are really dramatic implications for all 4 of these themes with regard to where I construct my intent. If I base my sense of security on what I'm getting from the world, because the world really gives me what I want at that particular point in time, I'll never be secure. I'll stay insecure. Whereas if I base my security on the quality of my contribution in the situation that I'm in, because I've always got control over the quality of my contribution, I'll always be secure. And I mean, one of the implications of this then is that you can't own yourself into feeling secure. And I think that really does make sense. I mean, you must have met very wealthy people in your life who were miserably insecure, because there's really no relationship between how secure you feel in your skin and how many assets you have. I mean, the asset that most dramatically demonstrates that is ownership of a house. I think quite universally, most people think that if you've paid off the bankers and the title deed to your house is in your own safe, you're secure. But I mean, that's just not true. I mean, if you owned your house and you had your own title deed, it was in your safe, and as you came home this afternoon, 2 meters from your front door, a thug leaped out from behind a bush and beat you to within an inch of your life, I don't think your house would rush out in your defense. In other words, I mean, if you look at the word security, something that promises to make you secure promises to protect you. It promises to intercede when there's a disaster aimed at you, and your house won't do that. So, in fact, there's not a single asset that you own that has admitted any kind of custodial responsibility with regard to you. Nothing that you own will come to your defense. But the opposite is true. So let's say, for instance, this hooligan is too frightened to beat you up, but when you're away at work, they completely vandalize your house, sort of cementing all the plumbing, and they smash all the glassware, and obscene graffiti on all the walls. I mean, will you be cross? Sure, you'll be cross. So the question then is, well, who's there to look after who? Are you there to look after the house, or is the house there to look after you? And clearly, that while the house has not admitted any custodial responsibility with regard to you, you've accepted a custodial responsibility for the house purely by claiming ownership. In other words, when there's a disaster aimed at you, the house won't intervene. But when there's a disaster aimed at your house, you will intervene. In other words, the more things you own, actually, the more vulnerable you become, because the more things can get taken away from you. You don't own yourself into being secure. You own yourself into being insecure. This issue of fulfillment has exactly the same logic built into it. If I base my happiness and fulfillment in what I'm getting from the world, because the world really gives me what I want at that particular point in time, I'll be discontented. Whereas if I base my happiness on the quality of my contribution in any situation that I'm in, I'll be fulfilled. This issue of power, let's say, for instance, I want something from you. I want your watch, and we assume you have a watch. Clearly, your ability to withhold the watch gives you power over me. It makes me manipulable. It makes me vulnerable to you. So while I want your watch, I'm weak. And it's for a very definite reason. I don't have power over what I'm getting from the world. I only have power over what I'm giving in any situation that I'm in. So if I construct my engagement on the basis of what sits there, I construct my engagement with regard to that which everybody else other than me has control over. So when I deal with the other on the basis of wanting something from the other, I become a victim. I'm under the victim's thumb. How do I reclaim autonomy? How do I get my power back? Well, I shift my intent from what I'm trying to get from you in the situation that I'm in to how I can be helpful to you, to what I can give. Because the moment I do that, I slip out from underneath your ability to manipulate me, and I become powerful. In any situation, the moment you engage the situation on the basis of what you want, you've just become a victim in that situation. The instant you shift your intent from what you can get to what you can give, you've liberated yourself. You've basically taken autonomy back. Why? Because you're now constructing your intent over on what you have power over. This issue of harmony is a further implication of this watch rule, because let's say, for instance, you and I are in the same room. I want your watch. We now know that your ability to withhold the watch makes me vulnerable to you. Your ability to withhold it makes me manipulable. In other words, you're a threat to me. If I want something from you, your ability to withhold what I want makes me vulnerable to you. In other words, you're dangerous to me. But not only are you dangerous to me, but precisely because I'm trying to get something out of you, I'm dangerous to you. In other words, simultaneously, you're dangerous to me and I'm dangerous to you. And when two people are dangerous with regard to each other, you'll have conflict. When I shift my intent from what I'm trying to get from you to how it can be helpful to you, in the first instance, you can't withhold the watch anymore. In other words, I slip out from underneath your ability to manipulate me, and I become safe from you. But not only am I safe from you, but precisely because I'm trying to be helpful to you rather than get something out of you, you are safe from me. I'm safe from you, you're safe from me. And when we are safe with regard to each other, we have harmony. In other words, folks, one has to understand just how supremely culpable we actually are for two things. First of all, what it feels like to be in our own skin, and secondly, for the world that we occupy. Because in the first instance, you have to understand that these four feelings of security, fulfillment, power, and harmony are products of how your intent operates. There's nothing that you can get from the world that will give you those things. You manufacture that inside yourself in your intent. Not only that, but you also manufacture the world that you occupy. And you manufacture that world transaction by transaction. So let's say, for instance, I'm a completely malevolent, self-serving swine. So every time I deal with somebody, I deal with them in order to get something out of them. And let's say, for instance, I've had 10 interactions with people today. So the first person I try and get something out of, we know how that transaction is going to end. It'll end in conflict. I go to the second person, try and get something out of them. That turns into a conflict. Third person, that turns into conflict. Conflict, 10 interactions. When I go to bed that night and I think about the world that I'm in, what's my comment likely to be about my world? Well, this is a dangerous place. They're all out to get me. And I'm perfectly right. They are out to get me, quite legitimately. Let's assume, however, that for the same 10 people, in the first engagement, I deal with a person on the basis of how I can be helpful to them. That turns into harmony. I go to the second person, how can I be helpful? That turns into harmony. The third person, how can I be helpful? Every engagement turns into harmony. When I go to bed that night and I reflect on the world that I'm in, what's my comment about my world? Well, this is the most amazing place. It is populated by my benefactors and my allies. So we have to understand, folks, that what you want from life is the product of your intent. It's the product of the intent to give or serve. But what one has to understand about this giving is that it's not about being nice. Giving is about being appropriate. So what I mean by this, for example, is let's say, for instance, Anna hears a knock at the door. She's in South Africa, and because this wouldn't happen in Sweden. So Anna's at home. There's a knock at the door. She opens the door, and there's a child of 9 years old who hasn't eaten in a week. She can see this. And the child's, it's very sad. The child says, please, can I just have one piece of bread? Clearly the appropriate thing to do in that situation is for Anna to give the child bread. Bengt, on the other hand, he's also visiting South Africa, and Bengt has become very athletic, and he's running through the park in the morning. He does this every 5 o'clock every morning. Bengt runs. He's running through the park, and he comes across a drama where a little old lady is being assaulted by a thug for a handbag. And the thug doesn't want to the lady doesn't want to give him the handbag, so there's a fight going on. And clearly, well, what's the appropriate thing to do here is, well, Bengt should assault the thug. He should beat the thug and give the little old lady back her handbag. Now, if you look at these two dramas and you ask yourself, well, in both instances they were giving, but their behavior was contradictory. Because when Anna was giving, she was sweetness and kindness personified. She gave the child food. When Bengt was giving, he was brutality personified. But that's exactly the point. Giving isn't always being nice. Giving is about being appropriate. It's about acting consistently with either the generosity or the courage that's operative in the situation that you're in. And if we say giving is about acting consistently with the generosity or the courage that's operative in the situation that you're in, then it has to mean that taking is about getting your logic wrong. In other words, that you act in a situation that requires generosity in a so-called courageous way and vice versa. So let's go back to our two examples. Anna's at home. There's a knock at the door. She opens the door. The hungry child asks her for food, and Anna slaps the child. Yeah, we're shocked. Anna, how can you do that? You beat the child. And she says, no, I'm being courageous. Well, Anna, that's not called courage. That's called selfishness. On the other hand, Bengt is running through the park. The little old lady's being beaten by the thug. Bengt rushes over, he grabs the bag out of the old woman's hands and he gives it to the thug. We're shocked to say, Bengt, why, what are you doing? How do you compute this? He says, no, man, I'm being generous. Well, Bengt, that's not called generosity, that's called cowardice. In other words, if the situation that you're in requires generosity of you and you act in a so-called courageous way, you're not giving, you're taking, we call that selfishness. When it requires courage of you and you act in a so-called generous way, you're not giving, you're taking, that's called cowardice. So, folks, what we're therefore saying is that if you have a look at this whole issue of giving, it's nuanced. It's not just about giving away the goodies and being nice. It's got two attributes. It's got generosity and courage. It's like a coin with two sides. But these two coins that aren't equal in weight or size, because of the two, generosity is the primary attribute and courage is the secondary attribute. And what I mean by that is that if you are here to give, your fundamental demeanor, your fundamental approach to the world will be kind and affirming. It won't be confrontative, because courage implies confrontation. So it means that your primary attribute of being here to give is generosity, and secondarily, it'll be courage. What one also has to understand about giving each situation its due is that these things are concerned with actions. They sit in the world. You might say he felt courage, but courage means nothing until you've actually confronted somebody. Generosity means nothing unless you've actually given something to somebody. So if you think about how you experience your life, at the limit of your perception, there's this thing called your peripheral vision. And at the limit of your peripheral vision, there's almost like a boundary. We call that boundary your window of perception, because everything that you see is contained within this boundary and is presented in front of you. Both generosity and courage, both of them require you to step through that boundary, step into the world and do something. Now, unfortunately, what's very often not apparent to people is that this thing of giving, actually sits in a different skill. There's a perceptual skill. There's an inward skill that sits behind giving each situation its due, and that's seeing things as they are. And this becomes apparent, the significance of this becomes apparent when you consider any situation where you actually didn't act appropriately. I mean, I'm sure there's at least one person in our current sort of circle of friends here in this webinar who hasn't sometimes done something inappropriate. And if you consider, how does that happen? I mean, you don't set out trying to do something wrong. I mean, it probably happens because you misappraised the situation. You made an assumption about what you were seeing, and that assumption was an incorrect assumption, and that's why you acted inappropriately. In other words, giving each situation its due is predicated on another skill, and that skill is called seeing things as they are. You cannot act appropriately if you have misappraised the situation, if you don't see the thing as it is. And what's very important about seeing things as they are and giving each situation its due is that they are mutually enabling qualities. It's clear that if you can't see the situation as it is, you won't give the situation its due. So seeing things as they are enables giving each situation its due. But it has a reciprocal effect. If you don't give a situation its due, if you misbehave, like for instance, you have a flaming row with your significant other this morning, and you're so distracted and angry, you skip a red light and almost run over Anna on her bicycle on your way to work. I mean, terrible person. How could you do that? You say, well, actually what happened is that you were so unavailable when you were approaching the red light with your attention stuck in the fight at home that you didn't see the situation properly. So if you misbehave, you leave a bit of yourself trapped in an unresolved drama that creates the conditions that you go into the next situation blind, not being able to see things as they are. So seeing things as they are and giving each situation its due are mutually enabling. And if we say giving its situation its due has these two attributes of generosity and courage, it has to mean that seeing things as they are has two similar attributes. So there has to be an inner equivalent to generosity and an inner equivalent to courage. So the inner equivalent to generosity is gratitude. Now, why is that? Because you see, when you are generous, basically when you're generous, it means you're giving in order to give away. I mean, if I give you something, but I give it to you with a sense of expectation, you've got to reciprocate tomorrow in like, then you can't call that generous. I mean, that's an investment. In other words, generosity is only generosity if it's giving to give away. Now, what makes it possible for one to easily give to give away? Let's examine gratitude as a quality. Surely when you're grateful, you recognize that you've received in excess of your due. I mean, if you give me what you owe me, I don't owe you any gratitude because you owe me that. So when I recognize that you have given me more than what I deserve, when you've given me in excess of my due, that sense of overflowing makes it easier for me to give away. So my gratitude enables my generosity. And like my gratitude enables my generosity, there's again a reciprocal effect. My generosity enables my gratitude because, let's assume I'm one of these people who can only give with expectations. I don't know what it means to give away. I don't know what it means to be generous. And then say somebody else, so Bengt gives me something. I mean, completely unconditionally as a gift. But because I only give conditionally, I will see his gift basically as him kind of having some expectation of me. And because that is the case, I won't be able to recognize that he was giving to give away. I will therefore not be grateful. So my gratitude enables my generosity, and my generosity enables my gratitude. These are two hands that wash each other. The inner equivalent of courage is trust. And the way to understand that, the simplest way of understanding that is we do this little exercise sometimes when we do personal excellence live. It's a blindfold falling exercise. So you get a person, you get the whole group of standing in a circle around somebody who stands in the middle who's blindfold. And the person in the blindfold is asked to fall, with the assumption, obviously, is that the people on the periphery will catch them. Now, obviously, initially, they're going to think you're nuts. I mean, I don't trust them. But then after some time, they summon up the courage to fall a first time. They get caught, they get placed back on their feet, and they earn a little bit of trust. And having earned a little bit of trust, it's easier for them to take a second courageous step. So your trust enables your courage, and your courage enables your trust. So therefore, if we say that giving its situation its due has these two attributes of generosity and courage, then it has to mean that seeing things as they are also has two attributes, gratitude and generosity. And what's interesting about the secondary and the primary attributes is they actually have a different orientation in terms of time. Now, because if you think about gratitude, when you are grateful, where are you looking, past or future? And you're probably looking at the past. Thank you for what you have done. And similarly, when you're being generous, you're giving away what you have accumulated. In other words, gratitude and generosity are about appropriacy with regard to dealing with the past. When you are trusting and when you're courageous, you're looking forward. I trust things will not go wrong. I don't run away as the enemy come over the hill. So my trust and my courage are about, if you like, looking forward, and my gratitude and my generosity are about dealing with the past. And one of the implications of this is that just like seeing each situation, giving each situation, I beg your pardon, its due, is to be generous and courageous. It means that seeing things as they are is to look at the past with gratitude and to look at the future with trust. And the implication to this, among many, is that if you aren't seeing, if you don't look at the past with gratitude and you don't look at the future with trust, you are doing violence to the truth. At some level, you're making a very grave mistake. You then put yourself on the negative spin of this, because clearly, of all of these attributes that we've spoken about here, the core thing you've got to get right is the issue of gratitude. So these two, if you like, turn into four. We say, well, of these four, what is actually the primary of the primary? The primary of the primary is gratitude. If I am deeply grateful, it's clearly easy for me to give away, because I know I've received in excess of my due. If I know that in the past I've received in excess of my due, it's easy for me to trust that things will go right in the future. And me being able to trust that things will go right in the future makes it easier for me to do courageous things. So my gratitude enables my generosity, and my gratitude enables my trust. The core thing to crack is gratitude. And when we don't crack it, when we don't get things wrong, we actually don't see things as they are. We have a presumption that the world is a dangerous place. And that presumption that the world is a dangerous place creates the conditions where we don't act on the basis of what's appropriate in the situation that we're in. We do expedient things. We do things with the spirit of what can I get away with. Further to this, when I'm presumed that I've been done in, I will then be resentful. I mean, the opposite of gratitude is resentment. And clearly, when I'm resentful, I don't want to give you anything other than a kick in the teeth. So my resentment actually produces selfishness. And, this is also reciprocal, because when I'm a resentful person and I keep on being selfish, the people around me experience my selfishness, and they therefore start to withhold from me and and then do things that reinforce my resentment. When I'm resentful and I've got this baggage of resentment from what's happened to me in the past, I won't trust, In other words, I look at the future with a spirit of distrust, which basically means to say that whenever I deal with you, I'm going to try and cover my wickets. I'm going to try and control you. I'm going to act in a cowardly way, which means to say that the core thing to crack is this issue of gratitude. And you also have to understand that this thing of being here to give isn't just about acting right. It's about seeing right. So if you say, this is your window of perception, if that's the looker, that's your window of perception. This thing of being here to give isn't just about what you're doing. It's not just about what sits in the world, about giving its situation its due and acting with courage and generosity. It's also about learning to see properly, seeing things as they are. And when you get that right, we said in any situation, if you crack the code of being here to give, you incrementally, transaction by transaction, you cultivate a world which is kind of presents itself to you as your collaborator, as your friend and your benefactor. The people around you aren't your enemies. When you get that wrong, when you have a presumption that you've been done in and you distrust the world around you, you're looking through a sense of red-colored lenses. In other words, you're not seeing the world as it is. You're seeing the world based on a presumption that it's a dangerous place. That creates the conditions where you will act expediently, you'll cover your wickets and you'll act in a selfish way. And that then eventually will present you with a world which you'll experience as hostile to you. In other words, if you don't crack the code on the inside, you basically produce a world which is hostile to you on the outside. The core work to do is work on the inside. And if we consider the nature of that work, there's actually two kinds of work that needs to be done. First of all, you've got to affect the lens you're looking through. And the lens you're looking through is really what you could describe as your intent. Your intent is born by your internal dialogue, the messaging you give to yourself about your world on an ongoing basis. And all of us do this. We've got a commentary about the world that we have, which is a kind of like, which sort of tinges how we see things, because the commentary of our world has a register. And what I mean by register is, if you're reading a piece of text, let's say, for instance, you're reading sort of a Stephen King novel, and I ask you, well, what's the register of these? You say, well, it feels rather creepy, Or if you're reading a Robert Heinlein novel, it's like an adventurous, exciting register to the text. All text carries a register. And so does the text in your head, your internal dialogue that creates your interpretation of the world, that carries a register. And that register eventually becomes the color filter whereby you see the world. And so if you want to start to change the way in which you perceive the world so that you can act better, you need to change the register of your internal dialogue, because that affects how your intent operates. You can see intent, therefore, as a lens that we're looking through. But there's two kinds of work that you can do from a practice point of view to change your experience of the world. Not just the lens that you're looking through, the register of your internal dialogue that creates this tinge of feeling that you're sort of looking at the world with. But you can also learn to stand deeper in yourself. We call this issue being inwardly gathered. So literally consider my window of perception to be like my spectacles. I hope you'll be able to see this. And so normally I'm so close to the spectacles, I actually can't see that I'm looking through spectacles. So, and most of us are like that. We can't see the assumptions we're looking through. We assume the assumptions we're looking through and the color it paints the world around us is what the world is. That's not what the world is, If you want to really understand the lens you're looking through, then create the conditions where you can move back from the lens. And we call that process of becoming of learning to operate deeper in yourself. That is a process of becoming mindful. It's a process of learning to work with your attention. It's a process of becoming increasingly inwardly gathered. The deeper you are in yourself, the more inwardly gathered you are in yourself, the easier it is for you to change the register of your internal dialogue, because you're no longer identifying so much with what you're seeing. You're no longer thinking that what comes through the glasses is the world out there, because you start differentiating the glasses from the world. And therefore, because the glasses have now become objects to you, you can change them. So, when I was a kid, everybody's favorite car in South Africa was a Volkswagen Beetle. You remember and we had a very famous kind of expression that basically said, you can't work on the Volksie when you're in the Volksie, and clearly that's dangerous. You can't, if the car's broken, you can't work on the car while it's driving. You've got to stop. You've got to get out of the Volkswagen. Then you can work on the Volkswagen. It's exactly the same with this thing of your internal dialogue. But in this case, it's about getting your internal dialogue out of you, rather than you get out of it. So it's about learning to step out of it, putting it in front of you so that it can be an object to you so that you can work on it. And you work on it so that it increasingly starts to resemble trust and gratitude and seeing things as they are, rather than presumption, distrust, and resentment that delivers this world of the frightful world of conflict and challenge.